Chapter 7. Welcome to the Jungle. Notes from a Forest Monastery. Gin Kao Hruks Yang. Have you eaten rice yet? It's a strange thing to completely change one's life, if only for a while. With that at the forefront of my thoughts, after those first 2 nights in Bangkok, I boarded a plane and headed north to Chiang Mai. It pales in comparison in both size and frenetic energy to the capital. From Chiang Mai, I would embark up to the mountain's high and I monastery facilities. I scheduled 3 nights in the northern city to get my bearings, dump the last of the jet lag drag, and truth be told, have a few cocktails and good meals before heading up to the monastery and what I assumed would be a month of deprivation. It had been a long journey, literally and figuratively, and I needed to live me before giving myself up to the experience of a wholly different world. Questions constantly arose in my head. What the hell am I doing? Who am I to leave everything and everyone behind to search for something that might not even exist? The only thing I knew for certain was that, for the moment, I was standing at the edge of something elemental, something that might change me forever. But I wasn't sure whether it was going to be the kind of change that made me feel enlightened, or the kind that made me want to crawl back to the familiar hell I had escaped. Either way, I was going. The day came to head up to the mountains when I found myself wide awake in the pitch black darkness of early morning, wrestling with an unfamiliar wave of panic. Anxiety doesn't hit me often, but this was different. This was cold sweats and mental confusion. The restless hedonistic part of me didn't want to go, like the soldier in the Huey landing on the beachhead in Apocalypse Now, screaming, "I'm not going!" The emotional ape in my head wanted nothing to do with the journey ahead as the unknown gripped me in its talons. And as much as I had prepared myself for that radical shift, I was being swallowed up by the very act of stepping into it. Could I really go through with it? Could I really leave behind what I thought I knew about myself and dive into the unknown with a bunch of strangers and a philosophy I had yet to grasp? But I had made the decision. My logical self began trying to spank my monkey into submission. I was in Thailand and needed to follow through, if only to see what I might find, or what might find me. At the monastery, I would spend a month in deliberate contemplation, not of big universal questions, but of myself. Was it selfish to walk away from everything? Career, comfort, the easy apathy of routine, and vanish into stillness just to see what was left? Some folks thought so. Others called it brave or noble, but it wasn't either. It was something more bare boned than that. It was the need to strip life down to silence and see what truths crawled out when there was nowhere left to hide. I wasn't out to find myself in some spiritual brochure kind of way. I wasn't seeking wisdom per se. I just wanted to know if I could look myself in the eye without flinching. The truth, I figured, was already there, coiled up, quiet, waiting. All I had to do was stop dodging it. Look long enough, hard enough, and maybe I'd catch sight of it in what Elvis Costello calls that deep, dark, truthful mirror. I was ready to do the work, to stare into the silence, into whatever abyss had been growing in my soul, and meet whoever was staring back. Maybe he'd have answers. Maybe not. Maybe he'd just shrug and hand me more questions. But at least this time, I'd know who I was talking to. At the airport, I waited at the designated pickup spot, scanning faces for a flicker of recognition. It didn't take long for a man with a laminated sign with the I Monastery logo to find me. He looked me over with quiet curiosity, like he wasn't sure I was the right brand of lost soul, but I confirmed my name, and he checked me off the list just as other men began to gather around. 14 strangers from 14 separate lives, all heading towards the same unknown. We were going to need a bigger van. I hadn't expected such a crowd, but then again, I didn't know what to expect. My brain had been more theater than reason lately. One big monkey cranking the gears of my imagination station, conjuring scenarios that ranged from enlightening to absurd. Still, as I watched the others gather, quiet, cautious, mostly avoiding eye contact, I started to feel less alone. That same apprehension was written on all their faces. No one was pretending they had it all figured out. What surprised me more than the number of us was where we all came from: Germany, Denmark, Russia, Mexico, Australia, and Singapore. It felt like we'd all wandered out of separate rooms in the same strange dream, now bumping into each other in this holding pattern before whatever came next. I ended up sharing a row in van number one with River from Australia and Josh from the States. The kind of polite, surface level banter you'd expect followed. Where are you from? How long are you traveling? Hot enough for you? Until it gradually shifted into the meatier stuff. The why are you here kind of talk. The stuff that makes a van ride feel like a confessional booth on wheels. That's when it hit me. How different our reasons were for signing up. Each answer was extremely personal. It hadn't occurred to me until then that a single place could act like a lighthouse for so many drifting vessels, each with its own backstory and bruises. Some of the guys were chasing peace, others were clearly on the run, from jobs, heartbreaks, failures, addictions, maybe even themselves. Some sought wisdom. A few just needed the volume turned down for a while. And listening to all that made me realize there wasn't going to be a single path through this thing. No manual. No right way to show up. It was going to be as tangled and varied as the lives we'd each stepped away from. I wasn't ready. Not really. But I was willing. And maybe that was enough for now. Somewhere in that willingness, I hoped to find something: a thread, a shift, a small light in the dark, something real enough to carry home when this was all over. The van ride up into the mountains was a 2 hour journey, giving all of us time to reflect. After a while, we all shifted towards quiet, delving into introspection. But there was something in the air, a kind of shared tension as we were all about to shed skin and step into a new version of ourselves. None of us knew what that version would look like. All I knew was that the old me had to die, and I had to embrace that new reality and honor my evolution. The landscape gradually shifted from towns to villages, then to hamlets, each one smaller, each one a little more forgotten to time. The road grew narrower, curving back and forth upon itself like a serpent as it rose into the mountains. Just a month earlier, floods had ravaged the region. The rains had been the worst in decades, and in many places, it looked like nature had thrown a tantrum, leaving behind scars. Deep red soil appeared as though the hillsides had been slashed by a giant dragon's claws, left in ruins to bleed out. When we finally turned off the highway and onto the unpaved mountain road, the damage from the floods was even more savage. Slopes that had once been overgrown by lush jungle were now exposed. Raw, gaping wounds opened up the earth. Piles of trees and all the other flora that makes up those jungles lay in massive corpse heaps at the bottom of the slides, as if the mountains themselves had hemorrhaged during the season's fury. We made slow progress, inching past road crews with heavy machinery, their giant shovels and graders rearranging the earth, trying to rebuild road that had been ripped away by the torrents. After 2 hours with all that anticipatory tension permeating the cabin, we finally arrived at what would be our home for the next month, Monastery. We arrived at what looked less like a spiritual gateway and more like a temporary event tent. Some long tables, chairs, and the unmistakable scent of hand sanitizer. This was the check in station, though once we finished intake, it would become our designated dining space. Not inside the main hall, mind you. That was for the real monks. We, the aspirants, had our own area off to the side of the dining hall, a humble reminder that we weren't quite in the club yet. Intake was kind of like checking into a seminar, perfunctory and efficient. No one said much. You could feel the collective hum of inner monologues, equal parts curiosity, hesitation, and the occasional, "What the hell am I doing here?" I couldn't tell whether I felt excited or quietly duped by my own ambition. Was this the start of some grand journey? Or just another of life's cosmic jokes at my expense? And yet, as I settled into intake at that compound nestled somewhere between the jungle and my unresolved psyche, the more I understood that the road to clarity isn't a straight line. It's riddled with potholes, both literal and metaphorical, And there I was, rolling straight into one, dragging a full on carry on full of neuroses behind me. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was just a middle class guy from Washington State, showing up to a Buddhist monastery in northern Thailand, hoping to find something resembling truth. But maybe that was the first thing I had to set down. The idea that this was about finding anything at all. Maybe it wasn't about what I was going to learn or fix or achieve. Maybe it was about what I would let go. It was then that we met the monk in charge of intake, Luang Pai, brother monk, Fop. He was gruff, fast, and demanding, though all the while sporting a cheeky, subtle grin. The high voltage demeanor came from a man who obviously had nothing left to prove. I've spent years honing my BS meter, and this guy? His body language was broadcasting loud and clear. His whole tough monk performance was an act. I don't know what my fellow neophytes picked up on, but I felt I had his number from the get go. He didn't need to be as rough as he came off, but it was easier to impose this persona on us from the start, set the tone, and get us in line quicker. He had 14 not monks to wrangle and process, so while his method was brusque but efficient, it wasn't hard to see through. Curious to see how deep his role might go, I suddenly poked the bear and had a little fun at his expense. Not overtly, just a casual comment to see if he'd bite. And he did. His guard dropped faster than expected. Smile first, wink second. He and I knew the jig was up, though only a couple of others saw the crack. He did a quick pirouette from gruff competency to genuine warmth while still maintaining managerial efficiency. Fup wasn't as much about sternness as he was about getting results, and it was clear that beneath the brisk, boss monk persona, he was more than willing to share a laugh once he figured out that you could see through his armor. I would come to rely on his sharp wit, rapid organizational skill, and calm demeanor over the next few weeks. He wasn't just a mentor, he became one of my most trusted allies, and in the end, a genuine friend in my strange new monk world. LP FOP assigned each of us a large, lidded plastic bin, our new personal vaults that would reside in our tents, to be filled with only the bare essentials from our luggage: flashlights, bug spray, medications if necessary, and a smattering of personal items deemed compatible with monastic simplicity. I quietly slipped in a contraband copy of The Year of Eating Dangerously by Tom Parker Bowles, reasoning that even a monk in training deserves a little downtime from self enlightenment. I mean, come on. Man cannot live on Dhamma alone. The rest of our worldly baggage would be packed into our travel bags, then locked away into storage until our re entry into the real world. Fortunately, I'd packed two sets of silk thermals, two sets of thick winter socks, and a fleece beanie. Items that weighed almost nothing but delivered big when it came to keeping my soul from vacating my body at 3 a.m. They weren't exactly in the spirit of full renunciation, but I wasn't aiming for martyrdom. One of the monks, he shall remain nameless to protect the semi innocent of his advice, was slightly off script, who interviewed me via Zoom months earlier, strongly suggested I stash a few cold weather comforts. He repeated that tip enough times for me to get the message. This was a very good idea. A week into our residency, the temperature plunged into the low 40s Fahrenheit as rain set in for a week. Without those extras, I'd have spent the night curled in a fetal position in my sleeping bag, teeth chattering, questioning the Four Noble Truths and my own intelligence. I don't need a French feather mattress, though I enjoy them immensely. I'm not a Hilton monk, but I also don't believe in needless suffering dressed up as spiritual discipline. November in Thailand may be warm down in the cities, but up there, it felt like late October in southeastern Washington, soggy and cold. Enlightenment's great and all, but I wasn't about to get hypothermia trying to find it. Our assigned tents, modern nylon cocoons with rain tarps, sat on raised platforms beneath thatched roofs, propped up by sturdy steel beams. Each was separated by a patch of tropical gardens with just enough distance to suggest privacy. The tents were generously sized. for a tent. In the center, I could stand, but just barely. Still, it had ample room for my sleeping setup: a thick pad, an insulated mat underneath, real sheets, a serious sleeping bag, and a pillow that by some miracle wasn't a sack of rocks. My plastic bin fit neatly in one corner, with just enough room left to toss laundry in another until it staged a mutiny. Then came the parting. We said goodbye to our civilian clothes and travel gear with a longing I hadn't expected. For many, it didn't matter much. They'd be continuing in the Dhammakaya order or heading straight home. But me? I was setting out across Thailand for months when the program ended. When the warehouse doors shut behind us, locked tight for the month, it felt like more than luggage I was leaving behind. Changing into our monastery issued white t shirts with the monk life logo and drawstring pants were less about tradition and more about reality crashing in. No more looking like a tourist. We were officially inducted into the monk army. That first night, a strange thing happened. We discovered that the ascetic life the monks led did not mean deprivation or starvation. Because we'd arrived a day before the program began, we were served dinner, a final evening meal. It was nothing short of a feast featuring traditional Thai dishes in abundance: curries, stir fries, sticky rice, noodles, fruits, salads, vegetable soups, with hot teas or espresso drinks, and ice cream or yogurt for dessert. It was all so incredibly normal and deliciously indulgent. But the next day, the monastic schedule would begin. No more dinners, only breakfast and lunch, prepared by lay Buddhist volunteers from the surrounding mountain villages. After a brief tour and tutorial on where and how to scrub our plates in the washroom tucked behind the kitchen, a space that smelled of dish soap and wet mops, we were released to explore the grounds and settle in. The goal wasn't to make it feel like home. That ship had sailed. But to coax something vaguely homish from a nylon tent and a plastic bin. I did a quick recon of the grounds, staked my claim in my tent with the optimism of someone pretending sleep would come easy, and stashed my toiletries in my assigned bin in the shower and shave building. There were two communal bathhouses, one for us and another identical version for the full time monks. Each structure had stone floors and six generous dark stone walk in shower stalls, each equipped with a modern toilet, shelving, and a thick, lockable door for privacy. The only thing not included? Any sort of netting or barrier between the top of the stall and the jungle beyond. The roof was thatched and overhung, yet open to the elements on all sides, which meant every shower was shared with a broad range of arachnid biodiversity. Spiders of every shape, color, and unnerving size hung out in the rafters, corners, and on the walls. They weren't alone either. Other insect life took up residence, though the spiders did an admirable job managing those populations. Of course, that meant that our spiders kept getting bigger. Along the center between the six shower stalls, three on both sides of the perimeter, ran a bank of six large sinks, again, three on each side, set into broad countertops, each with a mirror above for shaving, or in my case, making eye contact with my reflection. Laundry was fully accounted for: three modern washers, three dryers, and multiple clotheslines under the overhang out back. Backup supplies: soaps, razors, toothpaste, bug spray, and more were stocked in the supply closet, free for the taking when your personal stash ran out or when a spider laid claim to it. There wasn't backup shampoo because, well, monks. All in all, the facilities were sophisticated, clean, modern, well designed, and well considered. The kind of thoughtful practicality that whispered, "We'll take care of the details. You take care of your mind." I awoke to the jungle, high in the mountains of northern Thailand at Ai Monastery along the Luang River after a surprisingly deep and rest filled night. The jungle, boasting a staggering array of greens, yellows, browns, grays, with the occasional splash of reds, blues, pinks peeking out from the foliage, was dense and exotic. A mixture of deciduous broadleaf and evergreen trees integrated into the grounds and surrounds. The banana trees were especially beautiful, yet comical, their stereotypical broad-leafed form interwoven with palms, teaks, ficus, laurels, mango, frangipani, jackfruit, golden shower, trumpet bush, papaya, cannonball, fig, oleander, poinsana, bamboos, jasmine, and pandan bushes hit my vision like a movie scene, only missing choppers with Wagner's Cry of the Valkyries blaring through the canopy. Many hardwood trees sported long, wispy beards of moss and lichen, mocking the shiny, clean shaven heads of the monks, their trunks adorned with bromeliads and orchids residing in every joint and angle they could root in. And thus, monk life began. The massive gong in front of the meditation hall tolled three deep, sonorous notes beginning at 4:30 a.m. sharp every morning, its reverberations rolling across the jungle like an ancient reminder that time, as we know it, doesn't give a damn about your sleep schedule. I set my alarm for 4 a.m. I was fortunate. I'm a natural morning person. But 4 a.m. is still 4 a.m., and you're supposed to somehow feel spiritually uplifted at that early hour. The first few days weren't so bad. We hadn't been issued our sabong bottoms yet, those strange pleated, folded sarong like garments that require a degree of origami skill to tie just right. For those initial mornings, our drawstring cotton pants and long sleeve heavy cotton t shirts would have to do. At 5 a.m., we met at the meditation hall for morning chanting. Yes, us monks love a good chant. Chanting is what you do in monasteries, even when you're tired, half sleeping, and your knees feel like they might just snap from the pressure of holding you up on a hard floor at the hour of absolute quiet. The older monks make it seem effortless. Those chants are long. Sometimes they stretch over 45 minutes. The drone so rich and steady that it starts to feel like you're tapping into something ancient, something that predates your very comprehension of time. The words and ancient phrases in the Pali language loop together in a melody so strange to Western ears, it becomes strangely mesmerizing. But those first few mornings, we sounded like a bunch of choir boys coming out of an ambient jag. The rhythm of it, the alien words, the strain in your feet, ankles, and knees, nothing about it felt spiritual. It was physical discomfort disguised in a veil of deep meaning. Chanting. It's not just for breakfast. There's evening chanting as well. When I looked around, trying to check my classmates for some sign of shared misery, sure enough, there it was. The collective, bleary eyed, deer in the headlights look. We were all in this together, getting it wrong in imperfect harmony. I looked up at the enormous flat screen TV. Modern technology, thank you very much for adding some digital flair to a sacred ritual where scrolling beautifully rendered images of temples from across Southeast Asia graced the screen as our cue to chant along. We weren't exactly nailing the phonetics, but we gave it our best shot. We were like a group of seventh grade band members trying to keep their instruments in tune during the first practice. But eventually, something happened. A transformation. The chants started to seep in. The rhythm settled. The words and phrases, once unfamiliar, started to click. It was like my body and mind learned the cadence as mental muscle memory, and with it, the stories, ancient, sacred, and far older than anything I could ever wrap my head around, began to burrow their way into me. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, it became our chant, not just a chant. It became the rhythm and pulse of our early morning and evening meditations. And here's the funny thing, no one talks about how much you'll miss it when you leave. No one warned me that I'd pine for those moments as we got better, and the chants started to flow their ancient stories up into the hills. Not the knees, not the cramping, but that eerie resonance of voices, all of us singing in the jungle. The sound of history flowing through you, and you can't get it back. Even now, sitting somewhere far from our meditation hall, I try to replicate it, chanting to an empty room with a YouTube prompt flowing beside me, hoping to feel that presence again. But it's simply not the same. The chants aren't something you can just pick up and play when you feel like it, as I do my guitars. You need the place, the time, the community, all of us, together. That's when the magic happens. And you only realize how much you miss it once you've walked away. Bante, an honorific bestowed upon me the moment I arrived. not because of any spiritual wisdom or extraordinary feats of accomplishment, or that I could channel my inner Buddha better than you. It was due to my age. I was the eldest of our group, which, in the context of Asian and Buddhist culture, automatically demanded respect. The title itself was an uncomfortable surprise. In monastic and indeed in Asian cultures, age affords you a bundle of privileges. I always went first at meals. I could, if I wished to, choose my chore assignments. And my accommodation, conveniently enough, was closest to the wash house. With age comes bladder issues. But the weightier expectation that comes with those invisible epaulets was to guide the others with my so called wisdom and awareness, even though I had no clue what those things looked like in a monastic's context. In my Western upbringing, respect is something you earn, not something that's handed to you like a participation trophy. So being titled Bante felt false, felt untrue, like I was that asshole kid in school who turned in plagiarized homework and still managed to get an A. Only here, my A came with ill defined responsibilities that I hadn't exactly earned. I brought my consternation up with one of the teaching monks during a quiet moment. He explained, gently, that this is exactly why I was perfect for the role. My lack of desire to lead others is often what makes a good leader. I understood the psychology behind it. Hell, I'd used it myself on others in the past. But still, it felt like I had been handed the role of a wise elder without any preparation or expertise. I sighed, resigned, feeling completely unworthy of the weighty title that carried the expectations of wisdom, humility, and leadership. It felt like wearing someone else's shoes. Too big, too wide, and completely uncomfortable. As the days and weeks unfolded, I would find my role would prove me wrong. I wasn't a fraud. At least, not completely. Sangha, a word that gets tossed around in lay Buddhist and monk circles like it's going out of style. What is it, really? It's the third of the triple gems, the first being the Buddha, the second, the Dhamma, that we pay homage to. We chant the phrases and bow to the wisdom within with a humble rev, reverence. But here's the catch. It doesn't mean a group of meditators or like minded folks sitting cross legged on a beach trying to manifest peace in the world. Nope. Sangha is a group of monks living together, sharing life as a monastic family. In the West, we've adopted it more loosely as a term for any gathering of meditators, but that kind of like calling a baseball team a football team. Sure, they're both sports, but that's where the similarities end. It's not quite accurate. But hey, Buddhists? We don't get bent out of shape and shake our heads over cultural appropriation. If you're going to mess it up, at least do it with good intentions, right? After morning chanting, which, if I'm being honest, feels less like devotional practice and more like synchronized yawning when you haven't had coffee, it was time for Dhamma class. Or Dharma class if you're feeling Sanskriti and spiritually accomplished before 6 a.m. We filed into the meditation hall like school kids who'd accidentally enrolled in a philosophy seminar. The floor was hard, but we had zaufus, meditation cushions, and chairs, depending on how advanced your knees were in their rebellion. I tried sitting cross legged for 10 minutes before my lower body staged a full mutiny, and I defected to a chair with no shame whatsoever. Our guiding monk, calm, warm, and somehow both awake and enlightened before breakfast, began walking us through the Four Noble Truths. He spoke slowly, like someone who knew that comprehension was a fragile bird, and we were all holding it wrong. There were diagrams, there were metaphors, there was the subtle panic of a room full of grown men pretending to understand concepts they were definitely going to Google once they got down off the mountain. He told us why we were here, what we were supposed to be doing with our minds, and how to approach it all with patience and presence. I nodded along like a man deeply absorbing wisdom, but internally I was still trying to figure out whether suffering in the First Noble Truth was meant to include the chair. By the end of that first class, I was pretty sure I'd learned something. Whether that was the first glimmer of enlightenment or just the urgent importance of lumbar support, I wasn't entirely sure. But I stayed upright and attentive, and that felt like progress. Then came the first meditation session of the day. Let me tell you, the 5 a.m. blush of a sky just beginning to wake up, while your back is doing its best to stay upright, rigid, and relaxed at the same time on a rather thin zafu, it's a hard combo. But we persevered in the name of sila, morality, and samadhi, concentration, until the clock mercifully hit 6:30 a.m. And then came the chores. Not symbolic chores. Not the kind where you sweep a single leaf in soft focus and call it spiritual redemption. I'm talking about real monk work, thorough and deliberate and done in focused awareness. This wasn't the kind of place where a few broom sweeps earned you spiritual merit. No one was exempt, and nothing was beneath us. We cleaned and stocked the dining halls, swept and leaf blasted every forest path as if we were preparing for visiting royalty, mopped the open air platforms and pavilions scattered throughout the grounds, cleaned the meditation hall with reverence, and scrubbed toilets with a level of diligence that would have impressed any health inspector. We sorted laundry, folded robes, and cleaned the shower stalls while having personal boundary discussions with our spidery companions. And yet, oddly, at least for me, it felt a little like home. Not the place, but the rhythm. In my life back in the West, I'm that guy who finds peace and tranquility in order. I've always deep cleaned everything in the house with presence, cleaning windows, washing delicate Riedel wine stems, mopping floors, dusting furniture, and tending to the yards. There was already a kind of private reverence in those acts, a mindfulness I hadn't thought to name. So, monastery chores weren't a burden. They were a bridge, a quiet continuity, one unexpected thread tying a life of dinner parties and pinois to one of quiet diligence up in a jungle compound. At 7:30 a.m., like clockwork, it was breakfast time. And let me tell you, after 3 hours of spiritual and physical labor, you start to wonder, is this the real practice? Or am I just here for the food? We weren't monks in a luxury resort. I mean, yes, our monastery is comfortable in all truly important ways. We were monks with a purpose. But damn, breakfast was delicious. Breakfasts at the monastery were lavish by any standards, but considering the setting, they were downright luxurious. Long tables loaded with crock pots, hotel pans, steamers, and cold platters were set up outside the dining hall on the long covered veranda. We weren't ordained monks yet, so we didn't have the privilege of dining inside with the teaching monks, visiting dignitaries, and our abbot. Instead, we dined like the soon to be monks we were, with all the humble reverence of an overstuffed brunch buffet. Thanks to the kind graces of the lay volunteer cooks, we were treated to a grand spread of traditional Thai dishes with enough to feed even the most voracious appetites. There was always a soup or congee, fried and hard boiled eggs, ham and sausage. Yes, meat. But as long as we didn't kill it ourselves, we were fine. A loophole I could live with. Rice or noodles, and daily smorgasbords of fresh fruits and green salads. We also had a large and very high tech espresso machine, which got more use than a beer garden trash can at a rock festival. That machine got so much use that I gave it a nickname, Monksap, though I liked Dama Blaster better. And to make sure we were well balanced, there were also cereals, instant ramens. The salted egg ramen was particularly vile. Yogurts, chips, cookies, and a variety of other snacks. Basically, the breakfast spread of a four-star hotel that just so happens to be surrounded by jungle and bald heads. Clean, sweet mountain H2O, both hot and cold, was always available no matter the time, in massive urns, making sure that hydration was never an issue. Deprivation? Not in the slightest. In fact, one of our teaching monks laughed during our initial Q&A and mentioned that many program participants actually gain weight during their time there. We were encouraged to eat as much as we wanted, but leaving unfinished food on your plate to be thrown away is an offense to the monastic lifestyle as well as to the generous people who donated that food. The key was not to pile your plate high with everything thinking that was your only shot at breakfast or lunch. If you were still hungry during mealtimes, you could go back for more. No questions asked or guilt thrown your way. At the head of our table, next to me, sat a rotating cast of our monk teachers, who would lead us in the pre meal blessings of the triple gems and regale us with stories ranging from the deeply allegorical to those that seemed designed to remind us that spiritual lessons could come with a dash of humor. We blessed our food, the lay volunteers who cooked it, the facilities, and the generous strangers who donated food through the local alms exchange or just straight up gifts. Those were, indeed, gentle times, filled with camaraderie, reflection, and, of course, a fair amount of light-hearted ribbing. No one was immune to little practical jokes at their expense. One morning, a brother monk, in his quest for sweetened condensed milk to add to his coffee, accidentally grabbed a bottle of salad dressing. Hey, Kewpie mayonnaise looks like condensed milk, okay? Unaware of his mistake, he poured it in, stirred it up, and took a few sips, only to discover his coffee was, well, not the rich, creamy concoction he was expecting. I made sure to bring this up at every available opportunity until the joke got decidedly cold, though I wasn't the only one. Just saying. After breakfast, cleanup was a group effort reserved for us not yet monks. A humble post meal ritual we approached with whatever scraps of awareness we could gather between introspection and the creeping heat of the day. We washed dishes together, swapping stories and discussing the Dhamma. A kind of camaraderie emerged through the clatter of cups, bowls, plates, and the squeak of rinsed utensils. When we were done and everything tidied up, we were free. Free to roam, free to think, or not think. Some wandered to the monastery library. Others journaled in sunny corners, trying to make sense of whatever internal earthquakes had rumbled through them during morning meditation. Some of the guys made their way to the riverbank to sit in the sun and relax, an activity that I enjoyed as much as the snakes, leeches, and spiders who, in the jungles of Thailand, don't always RSVP. They just show up when you're not looking, more often than not simply to say hello. They all seemed to like us monks, until, of course, they didn't. Those were moments I'd frankly rather not remember. For those of us more socially inclined, the stoop of our tent platforms became the front porch of temporary brotherhood. We sat on the edge of the platforms, or on the steps, swapping stories, finding out more about each other, sometimes delving deeper into some serious life questions, cracking jokes, or just watching the jungle breathe around us together as we listened to birdsong and watched the huge golden orb spiders slaughter anything that was stupid enough to venture into their webs. It reminded me of Brooklyn in the summer, where stoops are confessionals and comedy clubs all in one. Out here, though, we were stoop dwelling monks, hoodlums, but with bug spray. And strangely, it worked. The stillness, the talking, the odd mix of sacred routine and covering any open skin with DEET, it was becoming something like home, if only in that moment. At 9:30 a.m., we returned to the meditation hall for Dhamma class, a half hour more or less of teachings, followed by a full hour of meditation. Of all the sessions built into our daily rhythm, this mid morning meditation was my favorite. By then, the early morning chill had lifted, the body had moved, the stomach was no longer bargaining for attention, and the mind, already having navigated breakfast, chores, and a bit of shared R&R, seemed more willing to cooperate. There was a kind of readiness in that hour, a quiet window when everything aligned to make stillness feel natural rather than forced. I often sank into those sessions with an ease that surprised me, not because I was mastering anything, but because I was, perhaps, for the first time, letting go of the need to. Insights didn't arrive with fireworks or fanfare. It came gently, like mist lifting off the trees, just enough to see a little further inside. And on most days, that was more than enough. Afterward, it was time for lunch, our last meal of the day. The lunch spread was just as extravagant as breakfast, but with more noodles and stir fry, meats and seafoods. No one was leaving hungry. After cleanup, we had more free time until 2 p.m. when it was back to Dhamma class and meditation until 4 p.m. The midday breaks were lovely moments, a pocket in the monastery's clockwork day where time seemed to fan itself out like a lazy puppy in the sun. The mountain light took on a syrupy quality, pouring through the jungle canopy like rich golden waterfalls, catching on the dust motes and wings of hovering insects. A symphony of birdsong, less composed, more tumultuous, echoed from their jungle hideouts, with sudden bursts of rustling leaves and snapping twigs below announcing the unseen dramas of scurrying creatures. The jungle, dense and unruly, pressed right up to the monastery's edge like it was waiting for us to let our guard down. The trees, shrubs, and flowering plants formed a tangle of unfamiliar shapes and hues, as if nature had been working from a palette and botany book I'd never seen. There was extraordinary beauty, yes, but a watchful allure, the kind that doesn't quite trust you. At times it felt like a pack of velociraptors might burst out from the green wall, eyes glinting, ready to reclaim their territory and shred every robe wearing intruder in sight. But aside from the monks, who often moved like ghosts, my co inhabitants were the occasional squirrel, a few scrawny but streetwise temple dogs, and butterflies. Lots of butterflies. Outrageously colored, almost arrogant in their perfection. They flitted around the back veranda of our meditation hall where I'd sit to meditate, pausing just long enough to make me wonder if they were tiny surveillance drones sent by some celestial intelligence to make sure I wasn't slacking off. Every moment felt like an immersion into the present. The troubles, fears, doubts, and sadness that had once seemed so pressing faded away like distant memories. They were still there, lingering at the edge, but I was too busy soaking in the fresh mountain air, the view, and the inner workings of my mind to care. Then it was back to free time, a loosely defined interval that promised rest or reflection but often translated into wandering the grounds with my journal and pen in hand with no particular plan. I would read or write, but more often than not I found myself wandering in slow loops, often connecting with a brother from the Sangha. Usually, this meant orbiting conversations about anything but monastic life, talk of past travels, future plans, food and cooking, art, music, or life milestones. The rest of the time, I simply watched from a distance, trying to decipher the rhythms of the more seasoned practitioners, as if proximity might grant me a clue to their inner peace. At 6:30 p.m., we returned to the meditation hall. The evening session of evening chanting and meditation beneath the humming lights and serene gaze of Buddha until 9 p.m. After that, it was a quiet shuffle to the wash house, where we brushed our teeth with ritualistic precision and washed the day off our faces in cold water. Then, back to our tents, zipping ourselves into our nylon sanctuaries like spiritual caterpillars, observing the strict 9:30 p.m. curfew with reverence. Or maybe not. Was I the only one using a flashlight under the blanket? Like some wayward Hogwarts student hiding from the Dursleys? Probably not, but I didn't pry. We were a chatty bunch, but asking about rule bending felt like a violation of that unspoken don't ask, don't tell policy. I've always read at night. It's how I shut my brain down. But let's just say my reading list wasn't entirely approved curriculum. I'd borrowed a few Dhamma texts from the monastery library to try and, actually learn something about the world I'd ventured into. But my real bedside prize was The Story of Sushi by Trevor Corson, another book I'd smuggled into my bin. A gripping deep dive into the world of raw fish, seaweed, and obsessive culinary apprenticeships. Maybe not the most enlightenment adjacent material, but it was exactly what I needed. So there I was, flashlight barely flickering under my blanket like some teenage delinquent in a tent, sneaking in a few pages before the charge or my eyelids gave out. Outside, the jungle was more than happy to do its part in lulling us toward sleep. The nocturnal soundtrack was a full throated cacophonic riot of chirps, buzzes, rustles, and the occasional haunting call from creatures who didn't want to be identified. It was chaotic, alive, and oddly comforting, as if the whole jungle was saying, "Don't worry, we're awake, so you don't have to be." And that, my friends, was the schedule. Rinse and repeat for a month. On Thursdays, the schedule shifted. Instead of the usual mid afternoon Dhamma talk and meditation session, we'd gather down by the lazy little Luang River, which was, let's be more honest, more of a stream with big, rapid aspirations. On the thatched open air platform known as Sala 1. The Sala was a favorite hangout spot even on non confessional days. A breezy perch with enough space for 20 monks to sit in a circle, plus a few cushioned wicker chairs and couches for reading, journaling, chatting, or contemplating our spiritual progress while slowly roasting our upper bodies into the perfect shade of Thai tan. But on Thursdays, the Sala took on a new vibe: equal parts group therapy, Dharma themed summer camp, and deeply sincere soul stripteases, led by one or two of the teaching monks who'd show up with a prompt like, "When did you last feel truly seen?" Or, "Why are you here?" Or, "What are you still holding onto that no longer serves you?" We were invited, encouraged, gently pushed, or outright volunteered to speak our truths. It was the Buddhist version of a trust fall, minus the physical risk, but with way more emotional exposure. Since I barely knew these guys, and also because I've long since abandoned the illusion that protecting my ego does anyone any good, I went all in. I sliced my aortic soul wide open and let the guts spill out. Childhood hangups, identity crises, daddy issues, divorce, spiritual doubt, the full psychological mixtape. I held nothing back. One monk later called my approach brave, but I think what he really meant was unfiltered and mildly alarming. Still, something shifted after that. People followed suit. One by one, the masks dropped. We heard stories of heartbreak, addiction, lost faith, faith found, loneliness, longing, confusion, the whole shared human mess of it all. And in that open air sala, with the breeze from the Luang threading through the trees, we became more than just fellow monks observing precepts and sitting in a circle. We became something closer to brothers. When you bare your soul without flinching, and people don't turn away but nod that they've been there too, that's when real friendship happens. That's when you stop feeling like a spiritual tourist and start feeling like you belong. It was the day after our first monk chat clatch, Thursday, when something happened that caught me completely off guard and changed my life. One of those rare things that slips quietly into you, settles in without fanfare, and stays lodged in your heart forever. I was in the dining hall, taking a mid afternoon break, nursing what could only be described as a 15-shot latte. Monastic life doesn't mean going without caffeine, and scribbling in my journal. The place was empty. A gentle warm breeze drifted through the mesh walls as jungle sounds wafted in. That's when one of my fellow inductees approached and politely asked if he could join me. Tan the man. That's what I called him. He was a quiet guy, or so I thought. From Singapore, wiry, muscled, tattooed, calm, with a kind of cool detachment that had me assume he was just here for meditative tan and some peace. I knew only one other thing about him. He worked as a dive master on a small, impossibly idyllic island somewhere I hadn't heard of. He'd only opened up a crack during the group session the day before, but I had noticed something. When I was laying bare the raw, excruciating wreckage of my failed marriage, he was really listening. Not politely, not out of obligation, but with a fierce, quiet empathy. His eyes had welled up, just for a second, but I'd seen it. He'd sat down and asked if we could talk. I slid my journal aside and said, "Yes, of course." What followed was one of those rare soul to soul conversations that rarely comes along in a lifetime. He shared his own story, just as painful, just as wrecked. A parallel collapse. A different country, a different face, but the same ache, the same unraveling of love and passions for another. And in that moment, our pain braided itself together like two strands of rope finally finding tension and hold. We talked, we cried, we cursed the circumstances that had flayed our hearts. We nodded at each other through the heartbreak as if saying, "Yeah, man, I see you. I get it." And in that raw, unguarded space, we became true brothers. Tan the man, this gentle, open hearted, quietly extraordinary man, gave me something I didn't even know I was starving for: real, unvarnished human connection. No platitudes, no fixing, just presence, kindness, empathy, truth. A space where it was okay to be absolutely wrecked. I looked at him differently after that, with deep gratitude, with respect. That afternoon stripped away more pain than weeks of meditation or counseling ever could. It was a lesson in compassion. I'll never forget how healing can come not through solitude, but through someone else simply saying, "You're not alone. Me too." We became fast friends, still are. And even though we live a globe apart, whenever we catch up, WhatsApp is awesome for that. It's like flipping back to that table, like time politely stepped aside to let something important through. Our bond we forged in the quiet aftermath of his generosity still hums in the background, steady as ever. Every time we talk, I find myself wishing we were side by side again. No robes, no river, just two men with a cup of tea or a cold beer between us. That familiar hum returns. Not the sound of enlightenment, but something better. The easy rhythm of two open hearts that once crawled out of the same abyss and somehow found each other on the ledge. Call it wisdom, or shared survival, or just the rare comfort of knowing there's someone out there who saw you in your most stripped down state and didn't look away. Perks came with my role as Bante. Most notably, I had the privilege and honor of recommending, instigating, and occasionally guiding my brothers in a variety of ways. As the eldest, I was supposed to offer wisdom and direction, but in truth, I was winging it, playing the role of a leader who wasn't quite sure if that whole guiding thing was a passing phase or something I'd have to keep up until I got a real job. One thing I was sure of, though, I had done a lot of research on Thailand before arriving, and not just the obligatory travel guide stuff. I dove deep into the festivals, the food, the culture, the history, the land, and its people. This obsession paid off in ways I hadn't anticipated. One festival in particular had snagged my attention: Yi Peng, the Festival of Lights. And wouldn't you know it, Chiang Mai is the center of Thailand for that celebration. The date was perfect: November 15th, 2024, smack dab in the middle of our monastic time. By then, we would be fully ordained monks. Fate sometimes shines brightly. I had heard about the Yi Peng festival from a monk back in the States who found out I would be near Chiang Mai in November and clued me in. I sought out images and videos of glowing lanterns, called Kom Loi, floating into the night sky as people released those beautiful airborne light rafts skyward, creating a magical sea of rising hopes and prayers. What I saw was visually stunning and spiritually enchanting. But of course, there was one catch. We were 2 hours up in the mountains in monk mode, with no opportunity for a night out on the town. Naturally, I wanted to go. I mean, sure, desire causes suffering, that cycle of dukkha that we were all trying to break. But when you're sitting on a mountain of monkish duties and responsibilities, the idea of an epic light filled celebration becomes an enticing form of suffering. So I decided to go for it and leverage my Bante role into something fun for all. I sidled up to Luang Pai Fup, my mentor, my confidant, my sounding board in things intellectually rebellious, with a question that shimmered with potential scandal. Could we venture into town to witness that grand spectacle? The issues were many, not least were geography, logistics, and optics. Yipeng would be lighting up Chiang Mai 2 hours away, while we were stashed deep in the hills like Enlightenment trainees on lockdown, wrapped in orange robes and spiderwebs, serenaded by the jungle's symphony. But what's life without a little scheming? A plan formed in my head, hazy, half baked, and potentially heretical. One that might lead us to a moonlight celebration filled with floating lanterns and spiritual symbolism, or into a quiet lecture about attachment and frivolity. So I kept my trap shut until I had a solid yes. This little rebellion would stay hidden. If it turned out to be a no, well, nobody had to know I'd plotted an adventure. Karawa Krab, Luang Pai Fop. May I speak with you for a moment in private? I asked. Of course, Brother Lawrence, he said, his eyes crinkling with warmth as we strolled along the sun dappled path, the jungle quietly surrounding us. What's on your mind? I'd like to see if we could all go to Yi Peng. I want to pay for vans to take us there, as a sangha, I explained. Wang Pai Fop turned to me, his smile deepening, but there was a flicker of something thoughtful in his gaze. You are a good Bonte. I am not sure if that can happen, but I'll discuss it with Luang Pai Naurong Chai at our next meeting, LP Fop said, a glint in his eyes. I exhaled a little, hoping that my plan, with over a week's notice and my offer to cover the cost of two vans, would be enough to convince the powers that be. After all, what better way to bond as a Sangha than sharing in something as beautifully Thai as Yi Peng? A true cultural experience for the monastery as a whole. The days ticked by with all the urgency of a broken clock, and yet not a word was spoken about my request. We fell into our routine, that familiar rhythm that felt increasing like a veil between me and the world outside. I began to worry. Maybe Luang Pi Fop hadn't managed to bring it up with the abbot after all. Maybe my well intentioned plan to introduce some Thai cultural magic to our Sangha was just a well meaning fantasy, doomed to dissolve into thin air. As the suspense morphed into an insistent, nagging suspicion that my idea had quietly died in the jungle underbrush, I found myself pacing and mentally restless, like a monk on the brink of an existential crisis, or at least a really inconvenient bout of FOMO, fear of missing out. My monkey mind, that eternal trickster, had clocked in for overtime. It tossed banana peels of doubt across every promising thought. Maybe Luang P. Fop was pretending I never asked. Maybe I'd crossed some invisible karmic line by even entertaining the idea. Maybe there was now a special chant dedicated solely to my lack of discipline. I tried to meditate it away. I really did. I sat on my mat overlooking the stream, straight backed and determined, silently repeating, let it go, let it go, let go. But all I got in return was a Technicolor slideshow of floating calm loy, candlelit rivers and Thai boys and girls in silk releasing their lanterns with excitement that mocked my inner turmoil. Why was this such a big deal? I argued with myself. This is classic clinging, textbook craving. You came here to release attachments, not go chasing fireworks like a Buddhist moth to flame. And yet, wasn't joy also part of the path? Wasn't beauty a Dhamma gate too? Hadn't the Buddha himself, at some point, cracked a smile? By the end of it, I'd authored a full internal thesis justifying the spiritual merit of sneaking off to a festival. Chapter 1, Impermanence of Lanterns. Chapter 2, Mindfulness in Motion. Chapter 3, Non Attachment to Schedule. I was losing the plot, but in a philosophical way. And still no word from Luang P. Fop. Just me, pacing around, craving moral loopholes. Finally, I couldn't take it any more. I approached Luang P. Fop, who was looking as unperturbed as ever, as if he hadn't been the star of my anxious thoughts for the past several days. It was like he had been avoiding me, but that was just my monkey mind screwing with my mind. I don't want to bother you, but did you get the chance to discuss the festival with Luang P. Narong Chai? I asked as we worked together to fold my Jiwan into the perfect robe. Of course I did. You're being impatient, he said, laughing. We are all going to go, and Luang P. Narong Chai was touched by your leadership and willingness to sponsor the activity for everyone. A wave of relief flooded through me. Part joy, part thank Gautama I didn't get expelled. It wasn't just that the festival was happening, it was that I hadn't caused some kind of robe rustling disturbance in the force by even asking for it. No raised eyebrows, no passive aggressive proverbs slipped into morning chanting, no sudden double latrine duty. Just silence. Strategic, suspicious, silence. They'd kept it under wraps. A surprise. Oh, those playful monks, cloaked in saffron and mystery and kindness, apparently capable of pulling off covert ops better than a CIA field team. For days they'd walked around serenely, like nothing was brewing, while secretly plotting a festival jailbreak. Somewhere between morning alms and evening meditation, a plan had been hatched, and I hadn't even noticed a sparkle in anyone's eyes. I couldn't decide whether to bow in gratitude or accuse someone of gaslighting me with metta. Either way, we were going to Ying to Yi Peng, and now I had full spiritual clearance. The festival was only 2 days away, cutting it pretty close, but it felt like an eternity had passed in my mind. I had successfully dragged a bit of the outside world into our monastery cocoon, and I was gleefully excited to see it all unfold. Would you like to make the announcement at meditation this afternoon? Luang Pi Fop asked. If it's okay with you, I'd rather you or Brother Jug or what make the announcement. I would feel a little out of place, I replied. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other, a little hesitant to take the spotlight in front of the Sangha, even though I was technically the one behind the curtain pulling the strings. Luang Pi Fop slipped into his stern leadership role. I don't think that's appropriate. It was your idea and desire to treat your brothers to one of our most important festivals, so it must be you who tells your brothers. Be the leader you're meant to be. I sighed. All right, but will you be there? Maybe. And with that, he chuckled, his big grin leading the way as he left to attend to his always busy schedule. It was Wednesday, November 13th. As 2 p.m. rolled around, I made sure to arrive at the meditation hall early, strolling in with the deliberate serenity of someone who had news and was trying hard not to look like they were vibrating with excitement. I'd taken extra care with my robes, creased and wrapped with the kind of obsessive precision normally reserved for origami swans and sushi chefs. If I was going to be the bearer of glad tidings, I figured I might as well look like the man who had his spiritual and sartorial act together. Call it vanity, call it mindfulness. Either way, I wasn't about to announce a sanctioned escape to one of the most dazzling festivals in Thailand, looking like I'd just rolled out of bed. To my surprise, Luang Pi Narong Chai, our brilliant abbot and head of our monastery, was already there, seated at the teaching desk with that same serene smile he always wore. I sometimes wondered if he slept with that expression on, like an enlightened Cheshire cat. Up until then, his appearances had been rare as his time was spread thin across his vast responsibilities in the Dhammakaya order. So when he did show up, it meant something. Once our sangha had settled into place, mats aligned and back straight, I led the incantation, paying respect to the Buddha and our teaching monk. We then paid homage to the triple gems to start the afternoon session. Then, without missing a beat, Luang P. Narong Chai turned his smiling gaze toward me and said, Your Bante has something he would like to share with you. I rose. Hi. My name is Luang P. Satibalo, and I'm an addict of fun. A few grins broke out, recognizing the classic 12-step program intro, others just enjoying the awkward charm of it. Either way, the ice was broken. So, I hatched this mad plan, thinking we could all attend the Lantern Festival down in Chiang Mai. We all get to go on Friday, I announced. Silence followed. Then a few smiles cracked open. Then came the clapping, hesitant at first, then growing louder, and finally a chorus of "Thank you, Bante" rang out from some of my brothers. I think it took a moment for it to register. We were going to town. We were actually going to witness one of the great spectacles that captures the attention of the world every year, and we'd be fully monked up in our robes, heads shaved, and compassion flowing outwards like a tidal wave. Lanterns, lights, celebration. Bring it on. After the extraordinary privilege of listening to a Dhamma lecture from our abbot and sharing a meditation session with him, one of those quietly powerful moments where the air smells sweeter, I stashed my mat and hurried to catch up with Luang P. Narong Chai as he glided toward the administration hall. And I do mean glide. The man didn't walk so much as float, like gravity was an optional setting he'd long since disabled. Robes flowing, his steps inaudible, serenity radiating off of him like incense smoke. He didn't even turn around when I approached. He somehow knew it was me. Hello, Luang P. Satibolo, he said softly, using my monk name. Yes, that's me. I know. It has a certain ancient wisdom ring to it. That was fun, he added. The appreciation from our brothers was quite wonderful. I chuckled a little awkwardly. I've never really known how to take a compliment, but yes, everybody was incredibly kind. Then, getting down to logistics, I'll find Luang P. Fop and head to the warehouse to grab some cash for the vans. Just let me know how much it'll be, and I'll take care of it. But he just gave me his classic Narong Chai smile, equal parts compassion and knowing amusement. You won't need to do that, he said. We've decided the monastery will cover the costs for the trip. I stopped, cold, floored. But I want to do this, I said, and I meant it. I wanted to give this experience as a gift, a thank you, a memory. We know you do, he replied, his eyes warm and steady, which is exactly why it's our honor to do it for you and for our brothers. And just like that, I was wrecked. Gratitude welled up in my throat, sudden and humbling, stinging my eyes. I thanked him with every ounce of serenity I could summon, overwhelmed by a simple truth I hadn't expected. Real generosity doesn't just come from giving, it also lives in letting yourself receive. I wandered down to the Luang and parked my butt on the grassy banks after a thorough snake, leech, and spider check, which, for the record, is not paranoia, but a healthy respect for the local ecosystem gained from experience, and let myself just sit. I meditated not on breath or sound or posture or any of the usual inward stuff, but on generosity, the kind that gives without needing to be seen, the kind that asks nothing in return, the kind that reminded me that we're all carrying each other, whether we realize it or not. I was gazing into the moving waters of the Luang with the kind of soft, half lidded focus that comes only after a long sit, where the world is quiet and you start to feel more like a tree than a person. Simply there, breathing, still. I wasn't meditating anymore. Not exactly. I was just being, eyeing the way light played on the surface and how the current carried little bits of leaf and story downstream. I felt a presence behind me, that subtle shift in the air, that sixth sense you develop when you've been living among people who walk like cats and open doors at the volume of a whisper. I gently peeled myself out of that liminal headspace, half expecting I was about to be playfully shoved into the river by a gang of robe clad merry pranksters. Fair enough, I thought. I'd earned it. But instead of a splash, I felt hands reaching out, not to push, but to pull. A few arms slipped around my shoulder. A couple of warm pats landed on my back. Smiles, nods, murmured thank yous. A gentle hug. Not big gestures, but heartfelt ones. My brothers, those fellow seekers, misfits, travelers in saffron, were thanking me for organizing the upcoming field trip. And in that moment, something opened up in me. I felt pride, which, as any monk will tell you, is a very naughty thing to do. I made a note to meditate on that later, after I finished enjoying that moment. Because here's the thing, we don't always appreciate how much a quiet thank you matters, or how rare it is to feel seen and loved. But in that shared moment, there was no doctrine, no dogma, Only humans, stripped down to the basics: kindness, appreciation, and the unspoken bond of a group of men who'd chosen stillness over speed and reflection over reaction. That little meandering river never looked more beautiful. It was Luang P. Fopp's time to shine. Planning, logistics, and execution were the work he was born to do. Transportation had to be arranged. Local monasteries had to be notified of our intention to attend the festival, ballet being what it is. The timing for the day, from city arrival to festival time, needed to be dialed in. And finally, rules had to be established. How we, as newly ordained monks, were expected to behave while out in public for the first time, en masse, in our robes. Luang P. Fop tackled it with all his usual vigor, energized by his checklists and the challenges. The day before the festival was my birthday, a quiet one, the kind that creeps in unnoticed, like a cat through an open door. The idea of impermanence, of everything fading, everything shifting, etched itself deeper into my mind as the date rolled around. Another year passing while I was monked up, wrapped in robes instead of party clothes, eating sticky rice instead of birthday cake. No calls from back home came through, though I was allowed my phone just in case. No family gathered around a cluttered table. No wine, no toasts, no one setting the salmon en brochette on fire by accident. Not that I needed a party, but come on, where was my damned cake? Still, the day was kind. I was sitting out on my stoop in a pool of mid morning sunlight, watching my arachnid neighbor Boris, a golden orb weaving spider who had taken up residence beside me, build yet another architectural masterpiece with unsettling speed and terrifying grace. I'd begun to swear I could hear him grow as he plotted world domination. Or maybe just lunch. Then Tan the man strolled up. He had a glimmer in his eye, the one that meant either mischief or tenderness, depending on how his breeze was blowing. Without a word, he handed me a small slip of paper, gave me a warm smile, and wandered off like it was nothing, like he hadn't just delivered something that would live in my wallet for years to come. I opened it. Inside was a letter of heartfelt kindness, a birthday blessing. Simple, spare, and so heartbreakingly sincere that I felt the air leave my lungs. It wasn't flowery. It didn't pretend everything was fine. It held up a mirror to the hard truths of life and love and time, and then wrapped them in something soft, something compassionate. Every one of those words rang true and glowed like burning coal. I still have that note, tucked safely away like a revered ancient scroll, a relic of human decency, a reminder that a true friend can speak volumes with a few honest lines. What a guy. What a blessing. And that was my cake. Friday had arrived. Yi Peng Day. After our early morning chanting, meditation, chores, and breakfast, we were excused from our duties and instructed to assemble at the front of the monastery at 11 a.m. There we would board two vans for the journey down to Chiang Mai and the Dhammakaya Center on the grounds of Dutangastan Lana, where we would be treated to the Lantern Festival. Excitement buzzed through the van as we wound our way down the mountain. I shared what little I knew about the festival with my brothers. Yi Peng, the Lantern Festival, is an annual celebration marking the end of the monsoon season, a time to thank the gods for the water that would, hopefully, lead to a bountiful harvest. Always held on a full moon night in mid November, the festival's roots trace back to ancient India and then vanish into the mysterious fog of history. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, except the upper echelons of monastery leadership who kept secrets like operatives in robes, was that, as monks journeyed down from a remote mountain monastery, we wouldn't only be spectators at the festival, we'd be honored guests, visiting dignitaries, VIPs in saffron robes, minus the security detail, shortwave comms, and mirrored shades. That revelation was still somewhere on the horizon as we descended from our jungle retreat, stopping at one of Thailand's ubiquitous highway mega stations. Those strange commercial micro communities that dot the highways like oases of air conditioning and neon convenience. These places are miraculous in their consistency. A sprawling gas station, a large spotless public restroom, always a relief, a 7-Eleven or Lawton's, an Amazon cafe, no relation to Bezos, a fast food chain or two, and a few independent stalls selling things that smell incredible but are definitely not monk approved. Sometimes there was even a boutique peddling pastel streetwear, a baffling collection of cropped hoodies, rhinestone bucket hats, and graphic tees that no monk should ever be caught dead in, or cremated in, or reincarnated wearing. As newly ordained monks, we also weren't allowed to handle money. That meant even a bottle of water required a subtle gesture of charades and delegation. If you wanted something, say a pack of menthol lozenges or a banana flavored soy milk, you'd subtly point or nod or make a respectful gesture toward your item of choice, and then a senior monk would float over like your own personal spiritual concierge to make the purchase. It was, in essence, a weird little dance. Renunciation meets retail. The Dhamma meets Slurpee machine. What really sent me, though, were the expressions on the store clerks' faces as the temple van doors swung open and an orange tidal wave poured into the aisles. We looked like a Buddhist flash mob, a synchronized formation of shaved heads and serene faces, moving slowly but with purpose, inspecting the snack shelves as if evaluating them for karmic consequences. I noticed one young employee frozen mid restock, her eyes wide, as a monk picked up a box of pocky sticks and studied it like it might contain a hidden sutta. Another cashier looked torn between reverence and panic, bowing nervously at a monk who was deeply engaged in a contemplative squint at a shelf of seaweed snacks. It was pure monastic surrealism. We arrived at the grounds, pulling onto a large, grassy field. It was then that abject misery and suffering struck us like a playfully cruel spirit. We slowly made our way through the coned corridors, where bank after bank of street carts and food booths were set up, all of them cooking and selling everything you could ever desire to eat. There was a grilled steak cart. Come on, that was just cruel. The aromas were intoxicating and tortuous at the same time, because we were not allowed to purchase or eat any of those munchies. Our vans were led through one security barrier after another until we were parked as close as we could get, which happened to be two reserved spots at the front of the reserved parking area. Unfortunately for our noses and saliva glands, next to our vans were a fried chicken cart, a pad thai cart, and a fresh fried donuts cart, all in action, cooking up incredible smelling food, all of which we had to walk past and ignore as it was past 1 p.m., our cutoff time for eating. But those scrumptious items wouldn't be allowed anyway. The first inkling of what was to come hit us the moment we stepped out of the vans. All around us, people stopped what they were doing and bowed and offered wise. Not casual nods, full, respectful bows, hands in prayer position, heads lowered. I reflexively bowed back to one smiling gentleman, only to have him look up at me in surprise, like I'd just tried to tip a statue. Luang P. Fop gently pulled me aside and whispered, "Brother, we don't bow back, only to senior monks." Well, that was awkward. To my Western raised brain, returning a bow felt like a simple courtesy, an acknowledgement of connection and mutual respect. But I learned that in Thai Buddhist culture, lay people bow to monks as a form of reverence, not as a social gesture. It's not about mutual exchange. It's about the chance to generate merits, which is something people take very seriously. My instinctive urge to level the playing field had, in a way, short circuited his sacred offering. Lesson learned. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is simply accept honor. We were greeted by a group of warm, good humored elderly senior monks who lived at the center. With gentle smiles and the kind of grace that made me feel like royalty instead of a sweaty foreign monk, they personally led us to a vast hall where cold water and iced fruit juices were laid out for us. Thank goodness we were finally out of range of the food carts. Because earlier, as the smell of grilled meat and fried chicken wafted through the air, something deep and primal had stirred. Specifically, the image of a perfectly charred ribeye, the hardwood smoke, salted fat sizzling onto hot coals, each drip setting up a puff of flavor, which could break my willpower. It had invaded my sensory mind like a Trojan horse of hunger. I wasn't just craving steak, I was yearning for my domed barbecue back home like a lost lover. After we'd refreshed from the drive, we were invited to tour a garden farther down the campus grounds. It had been transformed into a showcase of our Dhammakaya Foundation's outreach programs with the mountain village tribes. The goal? To shift these communities away from not only traditional opium production, but a newer, far more destructive scourge, methamphetamine. Through education, regional grants, and government subsidies, the foundation was teaching tribal members how to promote ecotourism, monetize the beauty of their traditional arts and crafts, and cultivate high value crops like coffee and tea. It was economic alchemy, turning poppies and poison into livelihood and pride. The hill tribes had set up demonstration booths, each with polished signage, multilingual interpreters, and displays that told the stories of transformation. It was strikingly professional. Each section was a testament to resilience and reinvention. This wasn't just a feel good PR campaign, it was real, positive, tangible change. After a couple of hours wandering through that hopeful future, we returned to the main hall. We were invited to use a dedicated meditation space on the grounds. Many of us jumped at the chance. The hall was quiet, expansive, and bathed in the golden hush of late afternoon. I settled into a seated posture, and before I knew it, an hour had passed like a single breath. Then a gentle voice pulled us back. One of our teaching monks informed us it was time to prepare for the evening ceremonies. None of us knew what that meant exactly, but dusk had settled over the garden like a velvet curtain, and the stage was clearly being set for something far beyond our expectations. As it turned out, this was an even bigger deal than any of us had imagined. Our host monks explained that the ceremony grounds were centered around a massive tiered stupa where many monks, most of them novices, would perch for the duration of the ceremony. This was monks on display at a whole new level. They asked if we'd like to participate. Of course, we all said yes. There were two options. One group would sit in Padmasana, or lotus position on the stupa, candle jars in hand, holding meditative posture for several hours. The others would join a ceremonial parade, walking three slow, barefooted laps along an arched pathway that circled widely around the stupa and through rows of seats prepared for thousands of ticket holding guests. I chose walking meditation. As beautiful as the stupa option sounded, I knew my knees, and every joint below the waist, would have filed a formal protest. There's just not enough ibuprofen in the world to make lotus pose for hours seem like a good idea for me. I'm simply not built that way. The parade grounds were nothing short of theatrical. Professional grade lighting, a booming arena blasting PA system, and music that could have been ripped straight from a Disney princess montage. I half expected dwarves to march by with mining tools. For the 200 of us monks taking part in the walking procession, we were led along a hidden path behind the massive stupa and arranged into perfectly spaced, double row lines. A monk with a flair for order, likely Luang P. Fop's spiritual twin, handed each of us a candle. It came with a handle underneath and a glass bowl on top, shielding the flame from gusts. When the signal came, we began our slow, deliberate march. As I rounded the corner of the stupa and stepped into full view of the crowd, I was hit by the scale of it all. Thousands of people, possibly tens of thousands, had filled the parade grounds, every single one of them dressed in immaculate white, like a spiritual Coachella. These weren't just festival goers. They had paid serious money for those seats. They stood silently, reverently, lining the circular path, bowing as we passed, snapping photos and shooting video of our barefoot procession as if it were the main act. As we walked, I allowed myself a sly glance at the stupa where there was a lull in the paparazzi like masses. Every tier was occupied by monks in lotus position. Candles glowed in front of them like stars caught in amber. It was beautiful and undeniably cinematic. But also, I thanked Buddha I wasn't one of them. To this day, I have no idea what the three laps around the stupa symbolized, but I was more than content walking in mindful circles instead of locking my knees into eternal stillness. Finally, our laps were completed. I was in dazzle mode, feeling a bit like a celebrity. I had slipped into a walking meditation trance after the first round, when suddenly we were done with our duties. That's one of the wonderful things about meditation. Time becomes liquid. Slipping behind the stupa and down a path that was hidden from the public's eye, we handed back our candles and retrieved our sandals. We were now free to enjoy the ceremony, so I and some of my brothers who did the walk followed Luang Pi Wat around the backside of the public grounds to where I thought would be a decent viewpoint. I was wrong. A massive, new, open air marble temple loomed in front of us, clearly still under construction. Piles of construction debris and taped off sections hinted it was months from completion. When we were led toward its wide stone steps, I assumed we'd made a wrong turn or were about to get in trouble for trespassing. But without a word, Luang Pi Wat and Luang Pi Fop, with smiles on their faces, lifted the construction tape like bouncers at an exclusive club and ushered us up the grand staircase. The structure was dark, but with the open walls and full moon light filtering through, we could see well enough to climb without face planting. At the top, we stepped onto an enormous marble pavilion, its scale swallowing our footsteps. It was as big as the Parthenon. We were guided all the way to the far edge, where two long rows of chairs had been arranged for us. Some were already filled with my monastery's senior monks, along with a few unfamiliar faces. I guessed we're the monk world equivalent of high society. Sprawled out before and below us were thousands of festival goers, all organized into neat family groups, each group fussing with their lanterns, prepping for liftoff. The evening's MC, perched somewhere in the area with a mic and impeccable timing, kept the momentum flowing. There would be four synchronized launches, complete with blasting music worthy of a Broadway spectacle. It was a monk's eye view of something I had dared to imagine witnessing, let alone being a part of. And we hadn't even gotten to the main event yet. My Aussie brother River and I shared an amazed and genuinely surprised smile as we were led to our seats. I sat next to Luang P. Fop and put my arm around his shoulder. I looked at him with an incredible amount of admiration in my heart and said, "Thank you so much for making this happen." He looked back at me and smiled and said, "It wasn't me. It was you who made this happen. We just took care of the details." Then the crowd became unruly. Well, as unruly as a bunch of partying lay Buddhist could get. The MC was revving up the crowd, one that needed no encouragement, as she attempted to stave off their zeal for letting their first round of lanterns fly free into the warm night sky. She kept reminding the crowd, as the music built toward a crescendo, to wait for the countdown, and then the first, and then another, and then a dozen, then dozens of lanterns floated up like a spectral dream. It was a beautiful sight to behold. All the while, that poor MC was desperately trying to control the situation, but to no avail. Her performance reminded me of Kevin Bacon in Animal House frantically pleading with the parade crowd, "Remain calm! All is well!" And then she gave up. Abandoning any hope of a stately synchronized countdown, she blurted out, Five, four, three, two, one. Thousands of glowing lanterns lifted into the night sky at once, flooding our vision in a way that felt mythical. It was absurdly beautiful. I wasn't sure if it was just me sitting there on the elevated edge of the temple, slack jawed, but every monk was silent. Well, those with seniority, meaning they had the privilege to carry about their smartphones, were filming like proud dads at a school play. I've seen some truly beautiful things in my life, natural wonders across the globe, the loving gaze and smile of my ex wife, back when those things were still directed my way. My eyes have been blessed, bedazzled, and even brought to tears, happy ones occasionally. But this, this festival of floating fire, it earned its place at the top of the list, possibly elbowing everything else off the podium. Despite the bass still thumping somewhere in the background, the entire crowd, who just moments earlier had erupted in wild cheers when a rogue dozen lanterns jumped the gun, now stood utterly silent, faces tilted skyward, as thousands of hopes, prayers, and resolutions drifted toward the heavens, glowing like earnest UFOs. And it happened again, then again, and again. Each liftoff did nothing to diminish the previous round's sense of awe. Back in the van, heading home in the dark like some rogue monastic snack cartel, we rehashed the night while I not so stealthily passed around a large bag of contraband munchies I had cajoled Luang P. Fop into purchasing for me on the sly. I had stashed away my cash, a bag brimming with Linder truffles, Milky Ways, and gummies for the ride home. Technically off limit. The result? A feeding frenzy worthy of Shark Week on cable TV. Up front, Luang P. Fop maintained his noble facade of moral high ground, eyes forward, pretending to meditate, presumably thinking about impermanence or road safety. But I caught him, the faintest curl of a smile sneaking across his lips. He knew. He approved. Or at least, he didn't disapprove enough to remonstrate us. As we wound our way back into the hills, the black of night wrapped around the van like a soft robe. We occasionally spotted distant clusters of lanterns still rising skyward from little villages tucked away in the trees and folded into the mountains, still in mid reverie. It was like watching the festival continue in whispers long after the music had faded. Josh sat next to me, my brother and fellow globetrotter. We'd shared many conversations, intellectual rabbit holes, and the kind of sibling telepathy forged through time and shared dysfunction. But now he was quiet, staring out into the night, somewhere far away in his head. So, what did you think? I asked him quietly. He turned slowly, with that big, beautiful, unmistakable Josh smile. His eyes were a little glossy. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen anywhere on earth in my life, he replied.